La Yehudim Haisahoira V'simcha v'sason v'hikar Kein tiyeh lanu kois Yeshuos Esahu v'shem Adonai ekrar Ay ay ya da 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 dum bum bum ba da ba dum bum bum ba da ba dum bum 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 ba da ba dum da 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 dum bum di di da 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 la 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 ba da ba dum di di dun dun da 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 dum bum ba dun da 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 dum di da 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 dum bum ba da 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 dum ba da ba dum. A good vach, Shavua Tov. Great to be learning with you at the beginning of a week. It is the new week, Motzi Shabbos. And it's Erev Yom Kippur. Tomorrow night begins Yom Kippur. And we learned in Tractate Yoma, in the laws of Yom Kippur, that one who eats on Erev Yom Kippur is like one who fasts on Yom Kippur. So it's as big a mitzvah to eat tonight and all day tomorrow. Every time you eat, you're performing a mitzvah. And that prepares you for the fast of Yom Kippur. So eat, and keep eating. Today, you eat. And we had a nice little talk from Rabbi Halberstam visiting our shul, our synagogue tonight for third meal between the afternoon prayers on Shabbos, Mincha, and Marv, the evening prayer. And he said that, why is this? How can it be that eating on Erev Yom Kippur is like fasting on Yom Kippur? I mean, how exactly is it the same? How are you getting the same credit? How does that work? And why is it called afflicting ourselves when we're eating, right? When we're fasting, okay, we get it. We're afflicting our souls. That's what the Torah says to do. How are we afflicting ourselves when we're eating? Answer, I missed a little bit of the connection here, and I only have 10 seconds before I finish this little mini talk and we get to our class. But the bottom line is, by eating the day before, you're essentially partnering with your body. You are a soul. You have a body. You came into this world on a mission, the mission of your soul, and your soul is riding around in a body. Very tough on the soul because the body is constantly saying, I want this, I want that, give me this, give me that. The body is animal driven. The soul, of course, is a much loftier spiritual place, but they need to be partners. So by essentially, feeding the body all day long on the 9th day of Tishrei, which we are in now, Erev Yom Kippur, the day before Yom Kippur, we're saying to the body, okay, we're going to be riding around this coming year together. We're going to afflict ourselves together tomorrow. So engaging you in this effort, get the body prepared for Yom Kippur, and then we're going to go into Yom Kippur, and of course it's a day of atonement and facing, accounting, holding ourselves accountable for all our transgressions in the next year and trying to figure out how we're going to avoid doing those things in the next year. But it's also a day of great joy because our Father in heaven loves us so much and wants us to make this teshuvah, this atonement, wants to purify us, wants to help us make a fresh start. And the soul and the body are going into this process and into the coming year together. All right. Who's in the house? And then I'll light the wisdom candle. Nancy, North Carolina. Sharon in New Jersey. Bella in Florida. Paul in Connecticut. James in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Ryan getting ready for Yom Kippur. Marjorie in Georgia. Did my Facebook freeze up a little bit? Hold on a second. Doing that reload. Yeah, okay. So let's get into it. Where are we holding? We're on page 41 here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud. A few days ago, we passed the halfway point of our 7.5-year journey through the Talmud. And now we're entering chapter 2 here in Tractate Kiddushin. And I think isn't that the halfway point of Kiddushin as well? How many pages are in this tractate? I thought so. Yeah, there's 82 pages in the tractate, and we're on page 41. So it's nice to sit right here in the middle of our journey. Chapter 2, guess what? Tractate Kiddushin, laws of betrothal. We're getting back to the subject of betrothal. We've done so many digressions. Let's talk a little bit about how a man and woman become betrothed. Chapter 2, Mishna number 1. A man can betroth a woman. Oh, let's light it up. New wisdom candle for a new week. The Mishnah. A man can betroth a woman by himself or by means of his agent. Similarly, a woman can become betrothed by herself or by means of her agent. A man can betroth his daughter to a man when she is a young woman, either by himself or by means of his agent. That's the Mishnah. It's all about agency in the realm of the law of betrothal. Here's the Gemara. The Gemara starts by questioning the need for the seemingly extraneous halacha, the seemingly extraneous law stated in the Mishnah. Now that the Mishnah stated that one can betroth a woman by means of his agent, is it necessary to state that a man can betroth a woman by himself? Obviously, he can betroth her to himself. If he can do it with his agent, he could do it himself. Rav Yosef says the Mishnah writes both laws, that he could do it himself or do it through his agent, as it is necessary to state. Rav Yosef says the Mishnah writes both laws to teach that although the betrothal is valid either way, it is more fitting that the mitzvah be performed by the man himself than by means of his agent. It's legally binding, right, if he creates the betrothal through his agent, but it is preferable that he do it himself. And that's why the Mishnah begins with a man can betroth a woman himself or by means of his agent. And this is like that story of Rav Safra, who would himself singe the head of an animal on Erev Shabbos to prepare it to be eaten on Shabbos. And Rava, who would salt a turbo fish himself to fulfill the mitzvah to prepare for Shabbos. Although this could have been done by others. Now, when I read that, I was thinking, I'm so blessed. Nina prepares an unbelievable Shabbos every week. She works so hard every Friday, getting these meals together for all of Shabbos. And I participate. I go to the store and, I pick up some things that are needed and I try to buy flowers. But I'm kind of inspired by this teaching of Rav Safra, and so if Nina will give me some task among the many that she does, she will assign me one task in the cooking so that I can participate that and be helpful, I'm in. Okay, honey, just let me know. There are those who say, with regard to this particular mitzvah of betrothal, it also involves a prohibition, in accordance with that which Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, as Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, it is forbidden for a man to betroth a woman unless he sees her, lest he see something repulsive in her after the betrothal, and she will become repugnant to him, which will cause him to hate her. And to prevent this violation of what the Merciful One states in the Torah, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself, Leviticus 19:18, the sages ruled that a man must betroth a woman in person to ensure that he approves of her. Modern times, it seems unthinkable that somebody would marry someone they hadn't met. And recall that betrothal is more akin to actual marriage than to engagement in modern culture, because once you're betrothed, if you break off the betrothal, you need to get a divorce. It is not there is full marriage. I mean, there's other laws that come into play once they stand under the wedding canopy, the chuppah, and get married. But betrothal is very much like getting married. And would people really do that without meeting the person that they're going to be betrothed to? Yeah, sure they would, because in the ancient world, marriage, often did a lot more than just bring two people together. It brought families together, it brought communities together, royalty could bring kingdoms together. And the young people didn't necessarily have that much say in the matter. Now, even when it was all about ensuring that the couple would be happy together, it wasn't so much about dating and falling in love. It was that the parents would find a match for the prospective groom or bride that would be a person that is right for them. And the parents knew probably better than a young person, and they used to get married very young, what would be good for them, right? The parents would find somebody that was really compatible in so many different levels, right? Same values, same general level of intelligence, same general position in society, same kinds of families. So that it was much more likely that this match would work. And if you look around, there are some communities in the world today, Haredi Jews, but also, in India. There's a lot of communities in the world that still practice matchmaking. And they tend to have much lower divorce rates than the general culture where it's all about falling in love. But at any rate, even within a community that practices matchmaking, here the sages are saying they got to meet. If at all possible, they got to meet, because maybe there's just chemistry is completely off. And we don't want to create betrothals where we risk that. So really, it could be done through an agent, but much better, and some would even say prohibited to do without actual meeting first. And certainly in modern times, within the world of very traditional Haredi Judaism, they do meet, right? The parents and the matchmaker might find them what they think is a suitable match, but then the couple meets and they go on some dates, and if they don't like each other, it's off. They absolutely have veto power. And let's keep going here. And if there is a prohibition against betrothing a woman by means of an agent, then when the statement of Rav Yosef was stated that it is merely preferable that the betrothal be performed without an agent, it was stated with regard to the latter clause of the Mishnah. A woman can become betrothed by herself or by means of her agent. Now that the Mishnah stated that she can become betrothed by means of her agent, is it necessary to state that she can become betrothed by herself? That's obvious. It was in response to this that Rav Yosef says it is more fitting that the mitzvah be performed by the woman herself than by means of her agent. And this is like the story of Rav Safra, who would singe the head of an animal on Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos, to prepare to be eaten on Shabbos, and Rava, who would himself salt the turbo fish. Now, in this case of a woman who appoints an agent, there is no prohibition. So what they're saying is, both in the case, a man can send an agent to betroth a woman to him, and it's legally binding. A woman can send an agent to accept betrothal, and it's legally binding. But in both cases, it's better if the man does it himself and the woman does it herself. But the point they're making now is it's more important for the man to do it himself than for the woman to do it herself. Why is that? Interesting. It's not because it's a patriarchal society. It's actually because they're looking at this sort of psychological differences between men and women. And what they're saying is this. In this case of the woman who appoints an agent, there is no prohibition. She's not, it's not we're saying that it's prohibited for her to send an agent like some would say about the men. She can send the agent if she wants, just better if she does it herself. But we're not going to say it's prohibited. It's not as necessary to make the woman do it herself rather than send an agent. And why is that? It's that which Reish Lakish said. As Reish Lakish said, women have a saying, it is better to sit as two bodies, i.e. to be married, than to sit lonely like a widow. Once a woman has decided to marry, she is more likely to accept any husband whose betrothal her agent accepts on her behalf, and there is no concern that she will find her betrothed repulsive and violate the mitzvah of loving one's neighbor like oneself. And Rav Steinsaltz explains that Rabbeinu Yehonasan of Lunel explains that the statement that the woman need not see the husband before becoming betrothed to him applies only if she is familiar with his character and his family background, as in that case there is no concern that she will be repelled by his physical appearance alone. If she knows nothing about him, she is prohibited from becoming betrothed by means of an agent, since she might come to hate her betrothed. In other words, women are more likely to focus on what's important: character, values, what kind of a husband this man will be, than on his physical appearance. Men are, need a little more prodding to focus on what's more important. It's just another example of why women are considered to be on a higher spiritual plane than men. Now, the Mishnah teaches a man can betroth his daughter to a man when she is a young woman. And the Gemara infers when she is a young woman, yes, he can betroth her. But when she is a minor, no, he cannot betroth her. And this statement supports the opinion of Rav, as Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, and some say it was said by Rabbi Lazar, it is prohibited for a person to betroth his daughter to a man when she is a minor, until such time that she grows up and says, I want to marry so-and-so. If a father betroths his daughter when she is a minor and incapable of forming an opinion of the husband, she may later find herself married to someone she does not like. As we've learned before, the father can betroth his daughter even while she is a minor. She retains, however, a veto power. When she gets old enough to say whether she wants this or not, she can say no. And if she annuls it, she does not need a get. She could just walk away, and it's as if she was never betrothed at all. So that is a right that young women, that women have if a father betroths his daughter while she's still a child. The Mishnah states that an agent has the power to effect betrothal, and the Gemara asks, from where do we derive that there is a halachic agency? How do we know that you can appoint an agent to do anything that can legally represent you? And the Gemara answers, this is as it is taught in a Baraisa. The Torah states with regard to one who divorces his wife, that he writes her a bill of divorce and gives it in her hand and sends her vishilecha, out of his house. And the verse employs the verb, and he sends, veshilach. And the fact that the verse employs the term veshilach as opposed to another verb denoting divorce, vegeresha, teaches that he can appoint an agent, a shaliach, right? Shilach and shaliach as both words that share the root shin lamed ches. So the husband does not have to personally give his wife the bill of divorce. Interesting that they're learning that out, because these two words for sending and for appointing an agent are essentially the same word in Hebrew. They share the same root. We learn out from that in the case of divorce, where you have to hand the wife the document, you can give that document to an agent, and the agent can hand it to the wife and create the divorce. Right? We learned that in Tractate Gittin. So now that we've learned that, it's possible to appoint an agent in the area of divorce, how do we know that we can appoint agents in other areas of the law? Additionally, the fact that the term, and he sends her, vishilecha, can also be read as, and she sends, vishalecha. And this teaches that she too can appoint an agent to receive her bill of divorce. Furthermore, in this same passage, the verb is repeated in the phrases, and he sends her. Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 3, which serves to teach that the agent can appoint another agent if he himself cannot finish the job. So the Gemara asks, we found the source for agency with regard to divorce. From where do we derive that there is agency with regard to betrothal? And if you would say that this is derived from divorce, i.e., just as a wife can be divorced from her husband by means of an agent, she can become betrothed to him in the same way, well, the two cases are not similar. What is unique about divorce is that it can be effected against her will, while betrothal cannot. Right? A husband can hand his wife a get, and she takes it, and now they're divorced, right? And she doesn't have to agree to it. He can even put it in her domain, so she didn't even refuse to put it in her hand, but he can divorce her against his will. He cannot betroth her against her will. So therefore, a means of effecting divorce cannot necessarily be used to effect betrothal. They're different. And the Gemara answers that the verse states, and she departs out of his house, and goes and becomes another man's wife. Deuteronomy 24, verse 2. Since in this same verse, it talks about both divorce and betrothal. She is divorced from one and betrothed to another. That's why we can use agency in both cases. Because the verse juxtaposes becoming married to leaving a marriage, just as a husband can appoint an agent for the purpose of leaving a marriage, so too he can appoint an agent for the purpose of becoming married. And the Gemara objects. But there is that which we learned in a Mishna, in Terumos 4:4. In the case of one who says to his agent, go out and separate teruma from my field's produce for me. Teruma is the first 2% of the crop that is given to a Kohen, to a priest, and this is practiced when the temple is standing, which it hasn't in nearly 2,000 years, but we learn it just the same. Go out and separate teruma from my field's produce for me. The agent must separate teruma in accordance with the mindset of the owner, meaning there are different quantities of teruma that are permissible as teruma. He must separate the amount that he assumes the owner would want to give, as there is actually no fixed measure for the amount that one must set aside as teruma. There's not. We always say it's 2%. How can you say it's not a fixed measure? A generous person would give as much as 1/40th of the produce as teruma, while a stingy person would give 1/60th. And if he does not know the mindset of the owner, he separates an intermediate measure, which is 1/50th of the produce, and that is 2%. So 2% was the average. It could be as low as 1/60th, I guess 1.6%, and as high as 1/40th, 2.5%. So we're on page 41b. If the agent subtracted 10 from the denominator and separated 1/40th, or he added 10 to the denominator and separated 1/60th, thereby giving more or less than the owner intended, his teruma is teruma. Even though he didn't give what his principal would have given, still the teruma stands. From where do we derive that one can appoint an agent to separate teruma? Like that's the law of teruma, and you know, this idea that if he gives a little more or a little less, the teruma remains the teruma. That's the whole law. What we're learning out from it is that the principal, you know, somebody who owns produce, can appoint an agent to separate the teruma for him. That's what matters here. From where do we derive that one can appoint an agent to separate teruma? And if you would say that it is derived from divorce, one could argue what is an aspect unique to divorce is that it is considered a non-sacred matter in relation to teruma, and will have different laws. So one cannot learn from divorce that one can appoint an agent to separate teruma. When you give 2% of your produce to the Kohen, you are consecrating that amount of the produce that only a priest can eat it, a priest who's at a higher level of holiness than the rest of us. So there's a question of holiness, right? Holiness is not really part of the divorce proceeding. So how can you apply the fact that a man can appoint an agent to divorce his wife to a man can appoint an agent to separate teruma when teruma is a matter of holiness and divorce is not? And if you would say that the Gemara answers. The verse states with regard to teruma, so you also shall set apart a gift unto the Lord of all your tithes. Numbers 18:28. Now, once the verse states you, the addition of the word also in the term you also, why is it there? Why does it say, so you also shall set apart a gift unto the Lord of all your tithes? It could have just said, so you shall set apart a gift unto the Lord of all your tithes. The word also connected to the word you serves to do what? To include you and your agent. And the Gemara asks, and let the merciful one write in the passage concerning teruma that one can appoint an agent. And the law that one can appoint an agent to act on his behalf in these other areas, i.e. divorce and betrothal, can come and be derived from it. Now that the law of teruma says you also, and we understand that means you and your agent, so maybe we should be deriving the fact that you can appoint an agent in the area of divorce or in the area of betrothal from the law of teruma. Why not? And the Gemara answers, agency in these matters cannot be derived in this manner from the law of teruma because the derivation can be refuted. Separating teruma is different in that it is able to be separated by mere thought. It is enough for one to decide that a certain portion of his produce shall be teruma, to have that status take effect. And just as there is this leniency unique to separating teruma that you could do with thought even before you've taken an action, perhaps the leniency that enables one to appoint an agent is also unique to separating teruma, since teruma has this aspect that can be done with thought, but betrothal and divorce require action. We can't derive that just because you can appoint an agent in the area of teruma, that you could also appoint an agent in the area of betrothal and divorce. So the Gemara further clarifies the source of the agents, for the source for the law of agency. Generally, the Passover offering was brought by a group of people together. But there is that which we learned in a Mishna, Pesachim 98b, right? And we learned this in Tractate Pesachim. In the case of a group whose Passover offering was lost before it was sacrificed, and they said to one member of the group, go and search for our Passover offering, right? Whether the lamb or the goat. And when you find it, slaughter it on our behalf. And this person went and found the lost animal, and he slaughtered it on behalf of the entire group. But meanwhile, despairing of his return, the group took a different animal and slaughtered it as the Passover offering. So in that situation, the law is like this. If his Passover offering was slaughtered first, he eats from his offering, and they eat and drink with him. But if they slaughtered their offering before he slaughtered his, he will eat from his offering, and they will eat from their offering. Okay, that's what the law is. And this demonstrates that one can act as an agent to slaughter the Passover offering. Irrespective of why we went from one or from the other, the point is that there's a group of people that have, right, with the Passover offering, which we did when the temple was standing, right, people would form groups, and you had to be a group in advance. You couldn't join a group once Passover had started, right? You had to do that before Passover. You had to say, we are a group, and sort of register together. We are a group. We're going to get a lamb, or we're going to get a kid, right, a young goat, and we are going to slaughter it, and we are going to eat it together on Passover night. Do all of them slaughter it together? No, they do not. One of the group goes up to the temple, hands it over to the priests. The priests slaughter it, dash some of its blood on the altar, give it back to the member of the group who went to the temple, and he carries the slaughtered lamb or the slaughtered goat back to his group, and they roast it and they eat it that night. Since they can't all do that together, since the whole nation can't enter the temple grounds on Erev Pesach, of course there's agency. The group had to appoint one of its members as an agent, and you didn't really have to go to the complicated law of if the goat was lost and one of them went out and then he slaughtered and he came back. We already know that sending one of them to do the slaughtering is an agent of the group. So we know that agency exists. That's what they're saying. Why not just use that? So from where do we derive this law that one can appoint an agent to slaughter an offering? And if you would say that it is derived from these other instances of agency, i.e. divorce and teruma that we just discussed earlier, one could refute this derivation by saying what is unique about those is that they are considered non-sacred matters relative to offerings, right? Even teruma is not nearly of the level of holiness as an offering that is brought in the temple. Teruma can be eaten by a priest anywhere. So what is unique about these is that they're considered non-sacred matters relative to offerings. So perhaps offerings have their own set of laws. So maybe we can't derive that just because you can appoint an agent for divorce or betrothal or for teruma. Maybe you can't appoint an agent in the case of the Pesach offering. So the Gemara answers, he derives it from that which Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha says, as Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha says, from where is it derived that the legal status of a person's agent is like that of himself? As it is stated with regard to the Passover offering, the Pesach, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall slaughter it in the afternoon. Is it so? That's Exodus 12:6. Is it so that the whole assembly slaughters the offering, but only one person from each group slaughters it? Rather, it can be derived from here that the legal status of a person's agent is like himself. If you appoint an agent to do something for you, okay, he's there in your place, and whatever he does as your representative is legally binding on you. Obviously, that's what an agent is. In light of this exposition, the Gemara asks, let the merciful one write in the Torah the law of an agent with regard to offerings, all right, with the Pesach. And then these agency in the cases of betrothal and divorce and teruma can come and be derived from the law of the Pesach. And the Gemara answers, agency in these matters cannot be derived in this manner because the derivation can be refuted. What is unique about offerings in the temple is that the majority of their actions are performed by means of an agent. Since most of the sacrificial service is performed by the priests, the Kohanim, who serve as the agents of those who bring the offerings, the general law of agency cannot be derived from there. So the Gemara continues to ask, for the reasons stated, the law of agency cannot be derived for any of these from any other one of them. Still, derive one of these from the other two, and the Gemara clarifies which of them will be derived from the others. So if you say, let the merciful one not write, in other words, they're saying, does the merciful one have to make clear to us that agency is possible in each of these areas? Or would it have been enough if God said, okay, you can appoint an agent for bringing the Pesach, you can appoint an agent for delivering a get, and from that we would know that you can appoint an agent for separating teruma or an agent for creating betrothal. Does it have to be spelled out in all cases? And basically what we're showing is how each of these cases is very different. So it's very hard to derive the law in any one of them, even from the combination of the others. So if you say, let the merciful one not write the law of agency with regard to offerings, and we derive agency with regard to offerings from these others, divorce and teruma, so that derivation can be refuted. What is unique about these is that they are considered non-sacred matters relative to offerings, as even teruma is not sacred compared to offerings in the Holy Temple, and sacred procedures such as offerings may have their own laws. And if you say, let the merciful one not write the law of agency with regard to divorce, and we derive agency in the realm of divorce from teruma and offerings, this too can be refuted. What is unique about these is that they can be designated by means of thought, and therefore may be easier to effect than divorce. Rather, it is the third derivation that is possible. Let the merciful one not write the law of agency with regard to teruma, and we could derive agency from offerings and divorce. Although teruma is sacred, offerings are more sacred, and yet the law of agency applies to them. Although the separating of teruma can be accomplished by means of thought as opposed to divorce, offerings can also be designated by means of thought. You could say, I'm thinking I'm going to separate this animal to become an offering, and you could give it that status. And the Gemara answers, it is indeed so that the derivation for the applicability of agency to teruma. So the Gemara asks, okay, but then why do I need the derivation that once the verse states you, in addition to the word also in the term you also will separate tithes, right? So since we didn't need, we could have figured out that it's possible to appoint an agent to separate teruma from the laws of offerings and from divorce. So then why did the Torah include the word also beside the word you in you also shall separate tithes, which earlier we used to derive the fact that an agent can be appointed to do it. You could separate a tithe or your agent could. If we didn't need that derivation because we could have derived that you can appoint an agent for teruma from the areas of divorce and offerings, why did the Torah include the word also alongside the word you? That's what the Gemara is asking now. And the Gemara answers, it is necessary to function as the source of the statement of Rabbi Yannai. As Rabbi Yannai says that from the term you also, something else is derived. Just as you, those who appoint agents, are members of the covenant, i.e. Jews, so too your agents must be members of the covenant. A Gentile cannot separate teruma for you, even if he is appointed as an agent. You can only appoint another Jew to separate teruma for you, if you are a Jew. So the Gemara asks, why do I need a verse to teach that law? It is derived from that which Rabbi Chiya bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan says. As Rabbi Chiya bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan says, a slave cannot become an agent to receive a bill of divorce from the hand of a woman's husband on her behalf because he is not included in the laws of bills of divorce and betrothal. They don't apply to him because he's a slave. And this indicates that there is a principle that if certain matters do not apply to a person, he cannot act as an agent with regard to those matters. Therefore, since Gentiles are not commanded to separate teruma, that only applies to Jews, it's obvious that they cannot be appointed as agents for that process. And the Gemara answers, it was nevertheless necessary to derive this law for the case of teruma because it cannot be derived from the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. This is, as it might enter your mind to say, it is a slave who cannot serve as an agent to receive a bill of divorce, since he cannot release a woman by divorce at all. But a Gentile, since he is included in his own teruma, as we learned in a Mishna in Terumos 3:9, a Gentile or a Samaritan who separated teruma from their own produce, their teruma is considered teruma, despite the fact that Gentiles are not obligated to separate teruma. Well, if you say that, I will say that he can also be appointed as an agent. To counter this argument, the term "you also" teaches that only members of the covenant can act as agents for separating teruma, Gentiles cannot. Right? If you're saying that you can only appoint as an agent somebody who is bound by the same laws, then you could argue, well, there's a Mishnah in Teruma that says that if a Gentile who is not obligated to separate Teruma and give it to a priest, nonetheless, if he decides to do that, then his Teruma is considered Teruma. So it seems like Gentiles are included in the law of Teruma. So why shouldn't a Jew be able to appoint a Gentile to separate his Teruma for him? Answer, because that verse says "you also," and from "you also" we learn only one who is actually obligated, meaning a Jew. You can only appoint a fellow Jew to do that. Maybe a Gentile's teruma is called teruma, but he's not obligated to separate teruma. The Gemara asks, but according to Rabbi Shimon, who exempts one from paying an additional penalty for the teruma of a Gentile, this explanation cannot be stated. Rabbi Shimon is saying you could say that the teruma of a Gentile is teruma, but if you misappropriate it, you're not going to have to pay a penalty the way you would if you misappropriated the teruma of a Jew, meaning it's not the same. And the reason it's not the same is because a Jew is obligated to separate teruma, not when the temple is not standing, but when the temple was standing. Every farmer in Israel had to separate teruma, give the first 2%, more or less, to a Kohen, to a priest. A Gentile who was living in the land of Israel and decided to emulate his neighbors and do the same thing, it's commendable, it's worthy, it's nice. But he's not obligated in it, and that's why we wouldn't charge a penalty if that teruma was somehow misappropriated. It has to be replaced, like you have to replace anything that gets misappropriated, but there's not the specific penalty that normally applies to teruma. As we learned in a Mishnah, Terumos 3:9, if the teruma of a Gentile gets mixed with regular produce, it is considered to be a mixture of teruma and non-sacred produce. And if a non-priest eats this mixture unwittingly, he is liable to pay for it an additional 1/5 beyond its value, just as is the law with regard to one who unwittingly eats teruma. So that would say that the teruma of the Gentile is like teruma. But Rabbi Shimon exempts him from paying the additional 1/5. So according to Rabbi Shimon, the teruma of the Gentile is not really teruma, as he holds that the teruma of a Gentile possesses no sanctity and is considered a mere gift to the priest. If so, if there is no need to learn the additional halacha that a Gentile cannot act as an agent with regard to the separating of teruma, why do I need the derivation from "you" and "you also"? What they're saying is, well, according to the majority, we understand why we need it, that the term "you also" means that you can only appoint a Jew to separate your teruma for you because he is bound in teruma. But according to the minority opinion of Rabbi Shimon, since the teruma of a Gentile is not teruma, he's not at all obligated or included in that law, it's just a gift. So then what does "you also" teach? And the Gemara answers, even according to Rabbi Shimon, it was necessary to state, and I'm almost done, questions or comments, get them in. Even according to... reload the questions page. And the Gemara answers, it was necessary to state this additional term as it might enter your mind to say, since the master says that the word "you" is interpreted as a limitation, it means that you, but not sharecroppers, can separate teruma, as a sharecropper cannot separate teruma from the produce of the owner of the field, you can separate teruma, but not partners from shared property without the consent of the other. You can separate teruma, but not a steward from the estate that he is administering. And you can separate teruma, but not one who separates teruma from produce that is not his. So you might also say, you can separate teruma and not your agents. And the verse therefore teaches us that you also indicates that one can appoint an agent to separate teruma. That's what I've got for us tonight. And now I'm coming to some questions, and I'm seeing only one so far. Sharon, isn't the example of Eliezer affecting the betrothal of Rebekah to Isaac sufficient to support the use of an agent for betrothal? Perfect question, perfect example. Isn't that the model, the very model of sending an agent to effect betrothal? When Abraham sends his faithful servant Eliezer to go find a wife for his son Isaac. Abraham is very old at that time. He says, go find a wife for her. Eliezer goes, he does the whole thing. If he goes to the homeland where Abraham came from to get a wife for Isaac from Abraham's people, and he says to himself, if a maiden will come out and to water her camels, and she'll offer water for me and for my camels, then that will be a sign that she's somebody with a real refined character, and it would be a good match for my master's son. And indeed, that's exactly what happens. And Rivka comes out, Rebecca in English, and she is a perfect match for Isaac. And Eliezer creates that betrothal. And I guess the reason that the sages didn't use that story as the source for why an agent can effect betrothal is perhaps because even though the patriarchs and matriarchs instinctively followed the Torah before it was given hundreds of years later at Mount Sinai, still this story took place before the Torah was given. So maybe, we can't really follow that example in terms of the law of agency because it occurred before the Torah was given. That's my guess. I'm not sure. Perhaps we'll encounter that same question in the pages to come. That's what I've got for us tonight. Tomorrow continues Erev Yom Kippur. Remember, every time you eat, tonight and tomorrow, you're performing a mitzvah to prepare for Yom Kippur. And we're going to have our class at a special Erev Yom Kippur time, which will be noon Pacific, like the Friday schedule. We're going to do that tomorrow, Sunday, noon Pacific, for our class, Erev Yom Kippur. Have a great night.